Is indoor rowing a real sport? The question has come around several times where people think that indoor rowing is simply a fitness concept rather than something that people could actually compete at. So the question stands, is indoor rowing really a sport? The history of rowing is about as old as it gets. It's one of the original Olympic sports. It goes way back to the Grecian days, and it was a way that people actually created transportation at one point in time. So rowing has literally existed for a very long time in different forms. In the United States, rowing was the first collegiate sport to actually take hold and was wildly popular in the early 1900s, sometimes just absolutely filling the banks of rivers with spectators who were there to watch the racing. At times even there were trains that ran along the rowing courses so that if you had enough money, you could sit in a train and follow the entire race along. It was a very active and storied sport at the time. However, through the mid-1900s, it lost some of its favorability, and I would argue that up until maybe the mid-80s, it kind of sat quietly as a sport, where only really the elites that had access to schools that could afford the equipment were the ones who would really end up in the sport. But in the 80s, we started to see this surge of popularity again in the sport of rowing, and I would argue that it's only really climbed since then. And now one might say that indoor rowing is almost starting to overshadow the sport of rowing itself in the number of people that are involved, in the amount of dollars that are put into it. And so this discussion now brings us to the point of, is indoor rowing, which was typically used as simply the off-season training for rowing, is it its own sport now? And I think there are a couple factors that we need to consider to really answer that question. So at the end of the day, if we actually look at what the definition of a competition is, essentially it's a physical event where a person or team compete against each other for the amusement of others. That's essentially what makes something a competition or a sport. So in that very specific definition, yeah, indoor rowing is absolutely a sport. We see world championships in a number of different factors. So one of the very first indoor rowing competitions is called the Crash Bees, and for a long time it really kind of held the title as the world championship event for the sport of indoor rowing. It was essentially some rowers on the Charles River at first who all hung out together and spent a lot of time together. And in the early 80s, after the Olympics was boycotted by the US and kind of ruined some Olympic dreams there, these people came together right about at the beginning stages of when Concept 2 developed the Model A, the very first rowing machine, and they started with about 20 people doing this indoor rowing competition using ergometers, because the ergometer had, while it had been around forever, we finally got something that had a monitor on it that really allowed us to get a direct feedback of how your performance was going. And so that really kicked off what indoor rowing meant. And one could argue that Crash Bees was a really big reason for why indoor rowing is what it is today, is because Crash Bees even existed, that it created this platform where within a few years after its inception, Crash Bees was the world championship of indoor rowing. That right there clarifies 100% as a sport. Along with that, there have come all of these different ways that you're able to compete. For example, last year, the beginning of 2020, I was in Paris as the MC of the World Rowing Indoor Championships, WRICH, and it was a true indoor rowing championship with different distances. And it means that you are able to compete maybe at what your specialty is. Maybe you're good at 500s or 1000s instead of just 2Ks, or maybe you're great at them all if you want to do this. And this goes into adaptive categories as well as men, women, age groups, and weight classes, heavyweight, lightweight. Right there, we are saying that, boom, stamp of approval. Yes, indoor rowing is indeed a sport. However, let's just talk about more of the nuances that are going to go into what it means and whether or not you could even get yourself involved in such a sport. Many of you that watch this channel might be saying, wow, I had no idea. I just assumed that lots of us did this for fitness in our garages and our spare bedrooms. And 100%, that's who I want to talk to, though you guys are the ones that I really enjoy working with. But at the end of the day, if you find yourself getting intrigued, or maybe you have a competitive background and you're trying to find a way to get into it, the space of indoor rowing is actually quite abound right now with opportunities for competition. And most of them are almost entirely online. Now, with these different competitions, some of them have qualifiers, some of them are just weekend competitions. There are different ways to get involved, but it's honestly important that you know there is a space out there to do this. Now, you can start simply enough with with whatever machine you might have. Like for example, Concept 2 has the online logbook, and if you sign up for their emails, they host almost monthly challenges in which you can sign up, join teams in the Concept 2 logbook, and you can compete as a group or as an individual to accumulate meters or to do certain events at certain times year round. This gives you ways of staying motivated with whatever you're doing. If you're to look at something like Ergata or Hydrow, those machines have in-house competitions in which every week, I believe both of them do weekly competitions based off of either meters accumulated, time accumulated, or they set a challenge workout that you get to do each week. And that's an opportunity for you to challenge yourself and to see if you enjoy that level of physical performance, because competition, let's be honest, is not the end all be all. If you love it, then great. I want you to go compete. But if you just want to be healthy, please be healthy. Please understand, this is not me pushing you to compete, but I do think it's important you know you have options if this is something you start to enjoy. From there, you honestly have the ability at this point to start looking at even regional competitions because of the increased, or one could call it a massive surge of popularity with indoor rowing. When I started this channel in 2016, indoor rowing was there, but not incredibly popular. It wasn't what it is today. There weren't machines and companies clamoring to put their equipment into the space. Frankly, it was CrossFit that even had rowing to where it was at that point. Because CrossFit gyms valued having rowing machines in them, we started to see a massive surge in rowing machine sales that started around probably the 2009 time block when CrossFit really started to pick up in popularity. And so people started to clamor for those machines. That increased the popularity of Concept 2, that increased the popularity of the sport, and so on and so forth. So we've reached a stage where now you might be able to find regional in-person competitions. With COVID pending, who knows where that's going to end up, but it might honestly be possible to go find a regional championship of some kind, or a regional weekend competition, or a team competition. Frankly, you can even jump in with local rowing clubs that host local competitions like satellites to the Crash Bees. I know here in San Diego, the San Diego Rowing Club has an annual event that is essentially a feeder to go to Crash Bees. It's a sanctioned event. And so you can go and compete on a regional level if you so choose. And that's a wonderful way for you to start getting involved in the indoor rowing world. Stepping it up from there, that's when you start playing with the big dogs. And there are plenty of them all around the world. Now, when you talk about, let's say, Hydrow, Ergata, and Concept 2, you've got the big dogs that you're chasing, and you're generally going to chase them on some kind of a logbook or a just storage of distances, times, things like that, where you can compete against one another. So on the Concept 2 logbook, often you'll see people who are trying to tackle the 1 minute or the 500 or the 100-meter row. And in these competitions, you see guys like Brian Shaw, these massive strongmen who are just hulking human beings that can just move weight like it's nothing. They just look like they're picking up little plastic things. You're like, oh, you would crush me. If you are competing and you watch these guys like Brian Shaw compete in these very short distance events, it doesn't actually look like rowing on the water. And so there becomes this argument of, are they actually rowing? I would argue, yes, they are actually rowing for the purposes of that event. So with that being said, you could challenge the likes of those guys in online space, and it's easy enough. You could do it whenever you want to, as long as you fall in the same age, weight, then you can challenge that person at an elite level, arguably, of competition. So with those things being said, you have the ability to qualify ahead of time if they have qualifiers. That makes sure that you're in the time ranges that you need to get there. And pending that you hit those time markers and you qualify to get there, then you can go and you can compete with the big dogs on an actual stage. Now, of course, COVID kind of ruins the spectatorship of a massive arena filled with people, but at the end of the day, it's going to come back. We will find ways to get back to that. So if you're in an online space for the year, okay, we're all going through it and we're all dealing with it. But the point is, you've got this entire range of metrics, ways that you can get involved, compete. Let's say you're a member at Orange Theory. Well, I know for a fact that Orange Theory will have specific competitions that you can be a part of that are going to offer you the opportunity to be a part of putting in time, meters, whatever it may be for a specific challenge, and that gives you a way to compete. So is indoor rowing a sport? Absolutely. It 100% is. It doesn't have to be if that's not what you want it to be, though. And I think that's the important lesson and takeaway from this, is that indoor rowing has the opportunity to be a sport, just like on-water rowing has the opportunity to be a sport. But is all on-water rowing a sport? No. Is all indoor rowing a sport? No. It depends on what you want to use it for, how you want to use it, as well as how you view the activity in general. So I'm curious, what are your thoughts? Do you see indoor rowing as a sport? Would you go compete? Have you competed? And did you maybe just find out about competition and you're excited about checking it out? Let me know in the comments below. And while you're doing that, make sure you hit that subscribe button and the bell next to it so you get alerted when I come out with new videos. And don't forget to check out my playlist of gear reviews, where if you have been looking at what machine maybe you want to pick up, you can try and decide if it's Concept 2, Ergata, or Hydro for you.